It seemed as if suddenly the police decided they needed to make a very major move, and they actually entered the Temple Mount. There are reports that they rolled stun grenades into the mosque. That was a provocation that I think a lot of people said was inevitably going to lead to the scale of clashes. And I don't think we have a good explanation of whether this was a deliberate strategy or a situation that got out of hand.
Hello, there have been renewed clashes in Jerusalem between Palestinians and Israeli police a day after more than 200 people were injured in some of the worst violence in years at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Fighting broke out just as tens of thousands of Muslim worshippers prayed at the compound to mark the holiest night of Ramadan. More than 50 people were injured. Gareth Barlow reports.
Stun grenades against stones, Palestinian protesters and Israeli security forces clashing outside the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex in Jerusalem's Old City, one of the most revered sites in Islam. It's also the location of the Temple Mount, the holiest site in Judaism. The source of the anger? Weeks of rising tensions over the potential eviction of Palestinian families from their homes in occupied East Jerusalem, which Israeli settlers claim as their land. Earlier on Saturday, roads into the city became gridlocked as Israel ramped up security, fearing a repeat of Friday's violence. Coaches of Muslim worshippers were stopped at checkpoints, with cars left abandoned as people trekked uphill to the mosque complex.
We saw on social media that our relatives are being stopped in the street and they're not allowing them to enter Jerusalem. We came here voluntarily, without planning or anything. Everyone who has a car came to pick up people and help them.
Around 90,000 worshippers gathered at the site on Saturday for an event marking Ramadan, but prayer was soon replaced with protest. Officers on horseback clashed with Palestinian youths who lit fires and tore down barricades. The UN, EU, Russia and the US have all called for Israeli security forces to show restraint. On Monday, Israel's Supreme Court will rule on the legality of the potential evictions as Israelis celebrate Jerusalem Day. For now, Palestinian families pray outside the houses they may be forced from, but depending on the court's ruling, they may feel compelled to express their anger once more. There's a definite fear the clashes aren't yet over. Gareth Barlow, BBC News.
Well, Bureau Chief in Jerusalem for The Washington Post is Steve Hendricks, and he says questions are being raised over the police's handling of the situation.
Well, another night of clashes, not quite as severe or as widespread as Friday night. I think we have reports of about 100 people injured. And as with Friday night, most of those are the sponge tip bullets that police are using. They use the stun grenades that have plastic shrapnel, which can cause injuries. So more clashes. Thankfully, no serious injuries last night, and it seemed to be maybe a notch lower down.
Steve, one of the accusations, certainly from the Palestinian side, is that Israeli police very forcefully entered the compound where people were peacefully praying and inflamed the situation. What have you been able to find out?
Well, there have been a lot of questions of police tactics on the Temple Mount, especially Friday evening. That crowd of some 70,000 worshippers Friday, the last Friday of Ramadan, was well anticipated. The police were out in force. There were, you might say, preliminary clashes all afternoon, and then in the evening prayers, it seemed as if suddenly the police decided they needed to make a very major move, and they actually entered the Temple Mount. There are reports that they rolled stun grenades into the mosque. That was a provocation that I think a lot of people said was inevitably going to lead to the scale of clashes. And I don't think we have a good explanation of whether this was a deliberate strategy or a situation that got out of hand. Israel's security forces are saying that their main goal is to keep this from escalating into something more serious. They're saying that their tactics in the last 2 days have thwarted what they described as major potential attacks. On the other hand, activists and Palestinians are saying that they're deliberately inflaming the situation for their own political purposes, for intimidation. I think we're going to have a lot more investigation before we know more about who's making what decisions here.
Yeah, and what do we know about the sort of precautions that are being taken to prevent this from escalating in the forthcoming days? There are lots of potential pinch points, one being the possible outcome of that Supreme Court case over the eviction of Palestinian families from that part of East Jerusalem.
Yes, and that's not the only one. Starting this evening is the beginning of the celebration of Jerusalem Day, in which Jewish Israelis typically parade around and sometimes through the Old City to celebrate the Israel's takeover of the Old City in 1967. It's always a day of tension. Pretty bad timing coming this week. As you say, the Supreme Court could rule Monday. So I think security forces here on both sides, to be honest, are looking for a couple more days of inevitable tension. Then they have some hopes that there are not really the underlying conditions for a great flare-up. But you never know in Israel, and this is certainly the most serious clashes that we've seen so far in many years.
Steve Hendricks of The Washington Post.